Hi, my name is Ankit Anjaria. By qualification, I am a chartered accountant, company secretary, and a law graduate from Mumbai University. So, now that you've learned about the credit appraisal, that is appraising a person and checking whether that person is eligible for the loan or no, and once you found that the person is eligible for a loan considering his income and other attributes, we'll now look at the second stage, which is checking whether the property on which the person is wanting a loan, whether that is eligible or no. The reason why legal appraisal of a property becomes important is that the fact that a housing finance company is giving the loan on the premise of a property being mortgaged to it as security. Now, security means that the property which he is taken, which the housing finance company is taking for the loan, it wants a right that in case there is a default in the future or if the person does not pay up, then it should have the right to enforce the security, that is, take it with itself, sell the property and realize its dues. The reason why this is important is that the housing finance company is basically dealing with people's money, that is the shareholders and the debt holders. Before a loan is given, it is important that the property which is taken as mortgage is enforceable and is transferable and is realizable. So before everything is done and before a loan is actually approved, the housing finance company needs to ensure all these aspects. Only then the loan will be considered as secured. The other reason why security should be taken, apart from the fact that it is for protection of the depositors, is the fact that the RBI, who is the regulator now, wants every loan to be secured in a particular fashion. Otherwise, a higher amount of provision will need to be carried. Now, what is provision and how is provision to be carried, etc., we will look at it in the next module. So now that you've understood that the mortgage of a property is important, it is also important that when the housing finance company is taking the security, it has to ensure that it should be enforceable, as I said. Now, how do you ensure that it is enforceable? You have to ensure that the person who is giving the property to you as security, you have the right to realize the property. Now we come to how do you determine whether there is a right to enforce the security and the right to sell the property or no. Okay, for this we have to understand the fact that there should be ownership of the property. That is, I can charge a property to a housing finance company only if I own it, not otherwise. So is it possible for me to go and create security on the Parliament? No. Is it possible for me to go and create security on, say, Qutub Minar or Taj Mahal? No. Why? Because I don't own the property. It is only when I have the ownership rights and all the authority to create mortgage can I give it to the housing finance company as security. And only when the person has rightfully given the property to the housing finance company as a security can the housing finance company, if need be, enforce the security and sell and realize its dues. Now this brings us to an important question of what is ownership of the property, or how do you determine ownership of the property. So before we look at the second question, that is how do you determine the ownership of the property, it is important for us to understand what are the attributes of ownership of the property. There is no definition which is given in any of the acts as to what is the attributes of the ownership, but if you look at the various judgments that have come from the Supreme Court and various high courts in the country, there are about 6 or 7 general attributes which show that you are the owner of the property. Now, which are these attributes? The first one is right to possession. Possession is that you have the right to go and stay on that property or use the property at your will. The second attribute is right to object interference. So, right to object interference means that when you own the property, you have all the right to go to the police or to the authorities and complain if somebody is encroaching upon your property. You have the right to go to them and tell them that this property belongs to me and this third party has wrongfully encroached upon my property, and you please have him pulled out of my property because this belongs to me and not to him or her. The next one is to enjoy the property at your free will and to enjoy the fruits of the property. Now, what does this mean is that when you own the property, every income that flows from that property including the rental income or any other income, you have all the right to enjoy all that income also. The next one is to do whatever you want with the property. Of course, this is subject to the laws of the land, but as long as you are within the framework of the law, you have the right to enjoy and do whatever you want with the property. If you want to destroy the property, you can always do that. Practically, would you do that or no depends on other things, but you should have the right to do that also. So these are the attributes of the property. Now, funnily, there is no law in the country which has defined the term property. Even the Transfer of Property Act, which is the principal law which governs the dealing in the property, does not define the term property. It is only a Supreme Court judgment, which is R.C. Cooper versus Union of India, where they have defined the term property, and they have also given a very wide definition to say that ownership of the property basically means the rights that a person has as far as the property is concerned. It does not go on to define a property in the way you have other definitions which are straitjacket or exclusive definitions, so to say. So I reiterate, you should have ownership of the property, and only then can you give the property to a housing finance company to secure it. Now, why is it important for the housing finance company to ensure that you have ownership or no? It is because if you are mortgaging a property that does not belong to you at all, then the housing finance company will not be able to do anything with that property. That charge itself is void ab initio. Void ab initio means that it is illegal or it is void from the very beginning itself, and it is as good as the charge never existed. So now we've seen that what are the attributes of ownership. Now, when you are creating the mortgage, it is important for the housing finance company to remember one thing very clearly, that it's a settled principle of law that nobody can give something that he or she does not have. So for someone to create security or to create a mortgage or a charge in favor of the housing finance company, that person should be the owner. We've seen the attributes of ownership. Now, while the attributes of ownership may be clear and simple, it is also important to understand how do you determine whether a person actually has ownership or no. Because you may say that if you have the right of possession, that is, if you have the right to go somewhere, that is an attribute of ownership. Likewise, you have a right to go to, say, a municipal park also, but that does not mean that you become an owner of that property and that you can start doing whatever you want with that property. So all these attributes have to be looked at in togetherness and not individually. Okay, they are not attributes in silos, but all of them are to be bundled. Now, this bundle of rights which are contained in a property is called nothing but title. So again, there is no clear definition to the word title. Title is just a bundle of rights that a person has in connection with the property that we are talking about. So it is important for the housing finance company to verify the title in the first place, so that no surprises spring up at the time of liquidating the property. Because if the loan goes into default, and if at that time the company realizes that the person who's created the charge never had title to it, or there are certain other conditions that are to be fulfilled with respect to the property, it will not be able to enforce the security, and it will be left with the loan in default and with zero security, and it will be a complete loss for the company. That is why you have to ensure in the first place, before the mortgage is created, that the person has title, he has adequate authority to create the security, and the security is created in the manner in which it should be. So we'll take all these three parts separately.